Hey, good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, Mo.
All right, wonderful. Thank you, everybody, for joining the first office hours of the new year. So happy new year, everybody. And it looks like we've had 2 Zooms, which is great. So we had to just migrate people from the other Zoom to this one. And appreciate those who've been able to redial in. We have quite a few topics to cover today. Sage, myself, and the team, I think, will take turns in here covering a variety of community topics that have come of interest. I'm going to actually list those and make sure that if folks have other topics we want to bring up today, then we make sure that we allocate some time for them. But I doubt we'll have, I doubt we'll be short on time, as we have quite a few interesting topics to cover. So the first one is, there's been a lot of discussion in the community around the stale bot. So we will have a little discussion around the SEP that is being planned in January for the stale bot. I think Sage and Wayne have been doing some work here with the team, amongst others. So we'll kick off on that one. There's been a second one planned for February. We had a discussion about it, and we'd like to give an update as to where we stand around the labels. I think, Megan, you've been looking into that one as well. Deprecations has been a topic that came up from the community. We'd like to talk through that and where we stand. And perhaps even we'll start with that one, given just the amount of interest and questions that came up. The other topic that we also have is we have a discussion coming up on war group captains, updates on those, and a call for action around those. And then we'll close off with an update on Neon. Where are we? Where are we on the release candidate, etc. So if there are any other topics, team, that you would like to make sure that we surface for today's call, please go ahead and utilize the chat, and we can make sure that we have enough time for them. So Megan, maybe you can start us off with talking about deprecations, and then we'll transition into the 2 SEPs.
Yeah, let me pull them up here really quick. Do you just want me to highlight some of them?
Yes, please. Thank you. Okay. And maybe just provide some of the context around how we handled the deprecations. We have a few new team members and community members who are not familiar with the history. So if we can just give them some of that background and then get into them, that would be great.
Yeah, so one approach that we're trying to change, and obviously this is something we'll need to do when we're reviewing the PRs, but since a lot of these deprecations were already put in, we looked at them before deprecating them, is we want to try to, the goal is to affect people needing to change their states every release, and don't change it as often unless it's going to improve the feature of the module or the state or whatever in SALT. But if it's just a simple argument and we can keep the old deprecated argument and it's only a couple lines of code, we want to try to keep that in to sort of minimize the burden that it takes to upgrade within SALT. So with that approach, we actually ended up deciding not to deprecate some of the things that were set for deprecation. Let me pull up these deprecations and I can just highlight some of them. One of the deprecations I know that we ended up not going with is the expression form and target type. We've been trying to deprecate target type for expression form in favor of expression form. And we've done that a lot throughout the code, but one part of the code that it greatly impacted is mine.get. And what happens is if you have an older minion, I believe 2017-7, it would not work with a newer master if you're using mine.get calls because it was using the old target type. So we've decided to keep that in the code so that we can keep the compatibility between those versions. that is one of them I'd like to highlight that we've decided not to deprecate. Let me see here. To note, we also have a change log now. So I've been adding all the deprecations to the change log and to the Neon release notes. So the change log will be useful to view on a very little level what is changing, and the Neon release notes might have a little bit more detail about the changes. Sorry, I'm not as prepared. One of them we did deprecate that I felt was valuable and it might impact people's states is there was a misspelling in the heat module, for example. Environment was misspelled. And so that's been properly deprecated with the warning. And we did remove that because it's a misspelling. So I felt like that made sense to deprecate that. There's a quiet quarg in the command.run state that we deprecated. The reason being that it did not look like it was actually doing anything in the code, and I don't believe it was, and it was supposed to be deprecated since like 2014. It's been an old argument that really isn't even doing anything, so I felt that was appropriate to deprecate. The Nova Cloud driver is being deprecated, I believe, in favor of the OpenStack driver. So that's been removed. That's a big one. Let's see. I think that is on a high level some of the deprecations. Like I said, you guys can check out the change log or the Neon release notes to see everything. In the change log, I actually point to all the pull requests that actually do the deprecation work. But yeah, that's about it.
Thank you, Megan. And just a reminder, team, there's been some questions around what's being deprecated. As Megan said, there's a log. We'll maybe, Megan, what we can do, or Sage, as we collect all of the feedback from today's call, we can put a link for those who are new to this whole project. And of course, those who are familiar, you know where to go and look. If there's any questions, feel free to reach out to Megan on Slack. Thank you, Megan. All right. So the next topic we had, team, is one that has been generating a lot of excitement and enthusiasm in our Slack channels and discussions. And it was all really related to the notion of the stale bot. I'm going to ask Wayne in a moment to jump in and just give us some background as to what was been done based on the feedback cycle that we did prior to the holidays with the community members. But just as a reminder, and a little bit perhaps more of an upfront acknowledgement, the issues related to the stale bot really come or stem from the fact that folks spend a lot of energy and time, put in many of the changes and the recommendations, and the particular healthy process is a mechanism that allows us to get on top of these recommendations. And some tools such as the stale bot that allows us to archive and or move forward from things that, as the name suggests, have become stale. We as a community acknowledge that we've been on a path to do much better in getting to all of those recommendations and actioning the ones that have PRs behind them and so on and so forth, which really has been at the heart of all the changes we're making, whether it's automation of the test suite, whether it is the release cadence and so on. All of that has been designed for us to get much better at tackling our backlogs and being able to get faster at implementing the necessary changes that the team has put forward. So that's sort of the grand mission that we have. Independent of that grand mission, which has many actions, like the ones I described, test automation, etc., there is, of course, the more specific aspect of the stale bot and making sure that the stale bot doesn't start to become just a process that we invoke and frankly irritates us in the sense that we lose track of the things that we submit then we didn't get to. So Wayne, why don't you give us a little background around the feedback from the community and what action we have implemented and what else might be left for us to do, if anything.
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that we have noticed around the Stelbot is that it was closing some issues that shouldn't have been closed, or it kind of took a while. We had it, the setting kind of set out for a long time, just kind of under the assumption that things would get rolling, and sometimes that just didn't happen. So one of the suggestions from the community was, hey, why don't we just reduce that time? Because what happens is, you file an issue and maybe there's just not enough eyes on it at the time, and then you kind of forget about it. And then a year goes by and all of a sudden Stelbot closes something and you're like, I don't even remember what I was doing. So we have just merged some updates to Stelbot based on this community feedback. There are a few labels like confirmed and critical and blocker that will never get marked as stale. So if any of those labels are on the issue, it won't be a stale issue. And then we've drastically reduced the time to 30 days. And the thought behind that is that 30 days is long enough that if you're no longer interested, then you're probably not going to do anything after 30 days. But it's also close enough that you'll actually remember what it is that you were you had a problem with in the first place. So we've changed the Stelbot to go ahead and close things after 30 days. I know some people in the community Slack have noticed that. We actually just merged that change this morning. And so Stelbot has been going, working overtime, marking all these issues stale, which has actually been a pretty good thing because I've noticed a couple of issues come across. I'm like, oh yeah, that's not, that's not really a stale issue, but we do need to get back to that. So having that 30-day cutoff has been, at least I've noticed it has already been a nice thing. And then just as a reminder for those who, or for those who've forgotten or aren't familiar with how Stelbot works, is now all of the issues that are 30 days or older, it's adding a stale label and making a comment. If you go ahead and make any activity, go and comment on it, then it will remove the stale label. And as far as I'm aware, it'll have another 30-day cycle to check before it tries to remark it as stale. But if you have any issues that you've filed, go ahead and check your email or GitHub activity notifications, and you can go in and say, oh yeah, this is stale, it's not relevant anymore. Or you can say, oh yeah, Stelbot, that's not stale. I really do need some help with that. Yeah, that's kind of Stelbot in a nutshell. Any questions or anything that I missed?
Thank you, Wayne. So team, if you have any questions or you think of any questions, feel free to post them in the chat or please speak up. And then once we post the video recording of this as well, we'll also put some pointers to either where we've merged the PR so you can read a little bit more about it, as well as some of the notes of what Wayne just described, the action for everybody. But thank you. Appreciate that people have raised this topic. It's been discussed. And we've now taken action around that. And hopefully these changes we made will start to serve the objective of what the Stelbot was meant to do in the first place. As a broader community, we are all going to continue, of course, to work towards the sort of more, the root issue behind some of the feedback and the commentary, which is our ability to actually get through many of these recommendations, changes, PRs, etc., in a more expedient way. And certainly, there is a general sentiment in here that we have some actions in place, and those are starting to get us closer to that goal. Thank you for that, Wayne. All right, so we talked about deprecations, which is a reminder as we're working with the current release as to what it is that we're doing, the methodology that we're using, and your ability to look at code. Thank you, Megan, for that. We talked about Stelbot. Next on the agenda, I'd like to turn it back again to actually to talk about another topic that surfaced through the community, which is labels. And much of the background, of course, comes from the fact that we've instituted a labeling scheme. We've got a lot of feedback that says it's actually just not clear whether these labels, how should I be using some of these labels? Some seem to be a little bit, frankly, difficult to interpret. Which one should it be? I think we've scratched our head a little bit on this. We looked at other communities. We've taken some feedback, and I think we're at the beginning of putting a SEP recommendation that will go out for broader. Megan, can you give us some background as to the feedback we got and some of the thinking of what will come in the SEP?
Yeah, so just to give some background on why we're doing this, the current definitions are critical, high severity, and medium. And based on like high severity, essentially it just says salt doesn't work essentially. And critical is salt won't start, those kind of things. And so I feel like it was giving the wrong message that like everything that's high severity, we're gonna immediately be fixing. I think we need to make it more clear when something's gonna be fixed and if we're going to be fixing it. And so I don't want to discredit, or I don't want to take any credit for the work that Wayne's done, because he put a lot of effort, and we do have a draft right now of a SEP. It's not published quite yet. We're just refining it a bit, but I can elaborate on what it is right now. Essentially, we would have a release blocker, high, medium, and low, and we'll be defining exactly what each of those mean. And so it'll be clear that, hey, this is going to get into a release. High would be, okay, we're going to get to it after our release blockers. Medium, we still could address this, but it's definitely lower on our priority. And then low, obviously, is the lowest priority as well. So that is kind of the update there. So hopefully, I think we should be able to get that published this week, Wayne. I don't see why not. So, yeah.
So I actually have a question in Slack that just came in, Megan and Wayne, thank you for that, which is what will happen to been labeled with the existing labeling schemas? Are we going to ask people to go in and update them to the new definitions? Are we automatically doing that?
I don't know that we've specifically thought about that yet. We wouldn't, as far as I'm aware, only members of the SALT team can actually go in and add and adjust labels. So we would have to do that. It would be fairly easy to automate the process just based on some of the scripts and tools that we've knocked together recently. So if we do decide that that's necessary, and for sure any of the open issues, we would want to remap those to the new labels. As far as closed ones goes, I think there's limited utility to that, but for sure those that are open, we would want to go ahead and migrate those to use the new labels correctly.
Okay, that's great, Wayne. So thank you. So I think we'll also maybe add that in the SEP confirmation as to how we're going to tackle the existing ones for that. So again, team, if there are any questions or comments relative to these labels, please go ahead and feel free to share those. I appreciate folks who are sending me some of these Slack questions, but also feel free to add them here into the call itself. That way the recording can capture what's coming from the community as well. So if I am to summarize, Megan and Wayne, on the labels, obviously the definitions were not clear. There was emphasis that the language seems to imply that if you are in critical or high severity or medium, they all kind of, certainly at the high severity and critical, indicated that there was more severe conditions. And by having the high, low, medium, and release blocker, we will have a little bit more of a gradient that also captures things that are low without sort of getting people confused that we're releasing with too many high severities, when in reality, they're not high severities. They could have been mediums or even mediums that have been low. So I think that level of simplification, clarity is absolutely going to be welcome by by the community and the team. And we thank everybody that, had raised the flag saying, hey, we can do better here, and to give us the chance to work on it and get your input. So thank you for that. And reminder, Wayne, as to when we expect the sub to come out for the community.
Sometime this week. I don't know that I have a good priority on that. Possibly
Okay.
Just later this week, maybe Thursday or Friday.
Okay, so we will look for it to come out maybe later this week or the start of next week. So keep an eye on that one. All right, thank you. So we talked about deprecations. We talked about the changes we made to the Stalebot, and then we talked about an upcoming change relative to the labels. And I believe all of those, cover sort of our community, process sort of areas. We have two other topics for today's agenda. One shifts a little bit more around the work groups. And I'll give a quick update on that. And then Sage also can just jump in to give us a view around some of the items that might be of help for the community to contribute to. And then also an update on Neon, which Diwaz will cover. So on the work groups, a couple of comments to make, team. Starting with our future office hours, we're actually going to be inviting the work group leaders to be joining this call and give an update on the work group. So this will be a quick way for us to look at what each work group has been accomplishing, as well as what's ahead, on their radar, and give them a little bit more of a forum to engage with the broader community through the call around any topics that may be top of mind for folks in the moment. So that's one thing to be aware of. We will be inviting them and they'll be sharing that. The second is, if you listened to the last office hours call, you will recall that we are actually starting a new work group around documentation. This has been one that has been absolutely voted for, highlighted many, many times. And there's perhaps a couple of branches of documentation work group will be covering. There is some sort of form of feedback that's been stemming from a lot of our newer community members that talks about, the getting started side, and then perhaps even complementing that with some samples and hints and tips and so on. So certainly that particular branch of the work group, I think, is going to be very much, anticipated. Highly anticipated, and people would like to see outputs from that. There'll be, of course, another branch that's related a little bit more to the advanced topics. There's been great reception to the talks that have been delivered at the SoltConf by many of our community members, whether it's on, and our core team members, whether it's on best practices with pillars or testing and so on and so forth. So we'll be creating some more documentation that surrounds those. And then the third category is really one which I think we've all kind of recognized and know that we need to spend some more energy and time on, which is related to accomplishing tasks in an end-to-end fashion. It is a very powerful platform through which we can accomplish many, many use cases. But it would be most helpful if we take a thread, for example, around networking management. How do I go and automate the configuration updates for some network devices and start to document against these types of use cases? Or how do you do these types of use cases relative to an IoT or relative to a server or so on and so forth. So we'll have, those three branches, getting starting, hits and tips, best practices and advanced topics, as well as use case oriented. So a lot to accomplish in that work group. Definitely a call of action for anybody and everybody, for those who Salt lovers, for those who've worked with it for years, for those who are trying it for the first time and know that there is a great hint. I know that there will be a channel through this documentation work group to actually channel your input and then very quickly be able to see that delivered back out to the community. So we're excited. Group. We're at the stage now where we are finalizing the captain. Again, Cassandra in the announcements channel had raised sort of the call for anybody who would like to be a captain to step in. We actually have one volunteer that came through, an individual that's very passionate about this topic. So we're very excited at the time when we close the window to get on with naming the captain of this work group and getting them move forward. The good news is we have, as I said, a very enthusiastic, passionate, and an outstandingly capable, volunteer to be the captain. And for those who are listening to this call or will be reading the summary notes afterwards, if you are interested in contributing as a member of the work group or as a captain, please feel free to reach out to myself or Sage by the end of the week so that we can also get you onboarded with that work group. Another work group, of course, that requires some action on our part is we've actually posted out during the holidays, so we're republicizing for this moment a call for a new captain to be nominated for the networking work group. So for those of you who are interested in taking on, that particular role and helping us with an ever so critical and growing part of the project related to networking, again, please feel free to reach out to myself, to Sage. Cassandra is out at the moment on a trip, so that's why I'm recommending you reach out to myself or Sage, or frankly any of the core team members, and let us know, and we will be sure to tackle that very quickly as well. So, captain for networking group, captain for documentation group, and if you have any thoughts and ideas or would like to be one of the core contributors and so on to that documentation group, please feel free to reach out. Anything else, Sage, I missed on the working groups you may want to highlight?
No, I don't think so. I think that's everything.
All right. Okay. Okay. So the one topic that remains for us, which I'm sure is on everybody's mind, an end of interest for everybody, is Neon. Where are we with the project? Diwaz, why don't you go ahead, please, and give us an update on that?
Sure. So I'll start with just giving people an idea of where we're at with the pull request migration from the original Neon and develop branches. So right now we have gone through about 15% of the total pull requests that need to be migrated. Unfortunately, I don't have stats of the percentage of those that were in the original Neon branch, because the stats that I have are between what was in develop and Neon at the time when we made the fork. So we have merged in the last month and a half 152 of those pull requests. We have 58 that have open pull requests, which still need to be merged, and about 20 to 30 of those we've labeled with the needs test case label, which means that someone from the core team or someone from the community will go in and add a test case for those. So we have 996 issues that have been merged but do not yet have a master port opened. So we are planning on, after we get into the next release cycle, we're going to go ahead and try to automate as many of those as possible. My just gut tells me it's going to be about a third of those that'll be automated, hopefully more, but that's more or less just a guess. So as far as the overall status of Neon right now, We are trying to tag an RC release by the end of this week. So currently we are just going through all the open issues and looking for any high priority ones that we need and want to get merged and will be able to be merged because of their test status. So if anyone has an issue, like a hot button issue that they have that they would like to get merged, you can go ahead and ping me on Slack and we'll work on getting that, making that happen. But we are planning on tagging an RC by the end of this week. Things like documentation changes and potentially some bug fixes could still go in after we tag the RC, but we'll have to handle the bug fixes on a case-by-case basis, just based on the amount of risk that it would introduce.
Thank you, Diwaz. So just to summarize, end of the we will be tagging the release candidate as has been shared previously through our roadmaps and promised with the team. So of course, we'd love everybody to get their hands over the RC, start to give us some feedback, etc., before we march towards the formal release at the end of the month. We will, out of this particular release is unique in the sense that we, of course, simplified the branches and we had to go ahead and migrate a variety. 150 DWAs, if I'm not mistaken, I heard you
Yes.
mention, is been already migrated and merged. We have 58 or so that are essentially flagged, but need, with about half of them needing test cases. And so those will be sort of the next wave of ones we would be working on. And then, of course, we'll tackle the rest of the backlog as our train station release cadence moves forward. So just a reminder, team, there's always an opportunity for anybody and everybody work on migrating their PRs. We very, very, very much are grateful and thankful for all of those community members who actually stepped up and helped us in that. So thank you for that. Of course, that just helps the speed up the whole process. And then, of course, ever so grateful for those who even stepped in to help with creating test cases, for PRs that may be missing and so on, and brought in their expertise. It's just a great, it is just great and wonderful to see the community rally together and help each other out as we do this particular migration into this new sort of release cadence. Just a question came up here, at least. Let me look at that. And Sage and Diwaz, we can answer that. So the question I have here in the Slack just says, can we clarify what will happen post RC? And then it just says, i.e. bug fixes. I think we briefly covered that, but perhaps we can give a little bit of a timeline, Diwaz, around once the RC, what's the team going to be working on? How can a community member, what they should be watching out for, and what can they contribute?
Definitely. So post RC will be in basically a code freeze into the master branch, but that doesn't mean that people can't still update their issues, their pull requests, and get the tests to be going green, so that once we're out of our RC phase, we can start merging things in quicker. As far as any bugs that are found during the RC and are fixed, we will get those merged in, provided they have tests and don't introduce a ton of risk, as well as any other bugs that are obvious known issues that need to be tackled. If we get pull requests for them, they have tests, the tests are passing, and they're not introducing a ton of risk, as meaning like super core pieces of salt, then we'll go ahead and work on getting those merged. Hopefully that clarifies where we're at.
And of course, as people identifying issues, please go ahead and make sure that you raise those. And the more eyes and so on the RC, the better the release itself will be by the end of the month. All right. That covers all of the topics that we had for today's office hours. As a reminder, team, we've also started to have an open hour, which is weekly. They are on Thursdays. During the open hours, the core team member and several of the folks from the community gather together. We give an update on happenings in our community, topics of discussions that are coming up. We also tackle any particular PRs that might be complicated or need discussions. So it is, as it says on the tin, an open hour. Folks can come in. We cover essentially the highlights of the week and any particular reviews, and tap into the expertise and skill and insights of the core team members. So we've had some good attendance. Of course, things dipped into the holiday, and we're starting those again. The next one is scheduled for, given that we've had the formal office hours this week, the next one is scheduled on the 16th, on the Thursday, and then they go weekly, essentially on every Thursday. So feel free, please, team, to join into those. That's always a forum for you to just come in, ask questions, raise any points, anything you would like, and it's a verbal medium, if nothing else, for us to continue the dialogue on topics of interest to us. With that, any other comments from anybody on the call or any questions? And we will go silent for a few minutes, as that is usually how long it takes for somebody to post anything that they have on their mind. Going once? Going twice? All right. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody, for your questions, for your comments, for the topics. Thank you to our speakers today. Sage will be making this recording available, and we'll post the link in the announcement channel. And again, Happy New Year, everybody, and hope everybody has a wonderful week ahead. Thank you. Have a good day or evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.